Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode and or listening to this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all of the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Fatimid Caliphate and the Song Dynasty. As well, from each empire, we will also highlight a specific leader. So from the Fatimid Caliphate, we will highlight Al-Muiz Lidin Allah. And from the Song Dynasty, we will highlight Emperor Taizu. That's my pardon me in advance for any mispronunciations. I will endeavor to mix between phonetical and also trying to get the correct pronunciation. I want to try to make it somewhat phonetical so people can research these words after if they're not a native speaker, but also I want to be culturally conscious as well. So without further ado, also at the very end of each episode, we will have a comparison between the two leaders. So in my first series, I covered Plutarch's parallel lives, and I learned a lot about the comparisons between the leaders at the end. So we will compare the two leaders to perhaps learn a bit more about them through their comparison or their similarities and their differences, and about their two respective empires as well. So without further ado, we will begin with the first empire and the first leader. So the Fatimid Caliphate, also known as the Fatimid Dynasty, was a major Islamic caliphate that emerged in the 10th century CE, that's Common Era, and played a significant role in the shaping of the political landscape in the Middle East and North Africa. Therefore, we will seek to find history of its rise and fall in the structure, sort of Schirer's rise and fall of the Third Reich, or perhaps there's also Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbon, which I'm also reading, but that's just necessarily decline. This is the rise and fall, I think, is the standard shape of most empires. Inevitably, every empire would have to have a peak, many of which we covered, so that will be the structure for this empire and all others as well. So the Fatimid Caliphate, or Fatimid Empire, was a caliphate extant from the 10th to the 12th centuries AD, or Common Era, under the rule of the Fatimids, an Ismaili Shia dynasty. Spanning a large area in North Africa and West Asia, it ranged from the Western Mediterranean to the Red Sea in the east. The Fatimids trace their ancestry to the Islamic prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima, very unique history there, and her husband Ali, who was the first Shia Imam. The Fatimids were acknowledged as rightful imams by different Ismaili communities, as well as denomination in many other Muslim and adjacent regions. Originating during the Abbasid Caliphate, we've covered the Abbasid Caliphate previously, the Fatimids conquered Ifriqiya and established the city Al-Madiyah. The Fatimid dynasty ruled territories across the Mediterranean coast and ultimately made Egypt the center of the caliphates, bringing Cairo to be its capital. At its height, the caliphate included, in addition to Egypt, varying areas in Maghreb, Sicily, the Levant, and Hejaz. We will cover the modern-day countries of that soon. So as for the rise of the Fatimid dynasty, starting in 909 CE. So the foundations. So the Fatimid dynasty was founded by Abdullah al-Mahdi Billah, who claimed descent from Fatima, who was the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, so claiming essentially descent from Muhammad himself, through her husband as well Ali, who was the fourth caliph. This claim to lineage gave the dynasty its name, so Fatima, but through the female side, through the daughter of Muhammad. Therefore, there was also a remote from the Abbasid, so Abbasid dynasty or caliphate was tied for the largest empire, tied with the Umayyad Empire, whose was sort of their similar regions as well and similar histories as well to caliphates as well, both tied for 7th place of largest empires throughout all history. But this Fatimid Caliphate came from a part of this Abbasid Caliphate. So the Fatimids began a Shia Ismaili movement opposing the ruling Abbasid Caliphate, which was Sunni, as we had seen. And I'm grateful if you have seen, or I'm grateful if you do watch or listen to that episode. They launched a successful revolt in North Africa, capturing the city of Mahdia in present-day Tunisia in 909 CE, so claiming autonomy. So like many of the empires, very example, for example, with the Macedonian Empire with Alexander the Great grew, and then it expanded, and then these Macedonian Greek states sort of separated. There's Greco-Bactrian kingdom, for example. Under the leadership of their second caliph, Al-Qa'im bi Amr Allah, the Fatimids expanded their territory, conquering Egypt in 969 CE. So Egypt would later become its capital. Cairo would ultimately become its capital, but it wasn't its first city, which is interesting and a unique feature of the Fatimid Caliphate, thus establishing the capital at Cairo too at the time they took it. So as for the Golden Age, the Fatimid dynasty experienced a golden age during the reign of the fourth caliph, whom we will cover in a specific biography, Al-Mu'iz al-Din Allah. This period saw significant advancements in various fields, including architecture, literature, science, and philosophy. So many empires had sort of seen a culmination, a couplement with arts and culture, writing, etc., architecture particularly as well for empires like this, but or sedentary empires, for example. But that's not necessarily true. Some had neglected that, but this is necessarily true for the Fatimid Caliphate. They were engaged in much art and much, particularly architecture too, which is maybe more unique relative. We had, for example, many nomadic empires who had very little care for architecture. So for their peak of power, which is from the period of 969 to 1074 CE, so as for economic prosperity, Cairo became a thriving center of trade and culture, attracting scholars, artisans, and merchants from across the Islamic world and beyond. As for the scholarship and learning in the capital and across the realm, the Fatimid court patronized in a positive sense. That's to promote the scholarship. Patronized often now has a negative term. That don't patronize me, but back then, for example, guilds, for example, patron systems, or patrons of art, for example, in this case, patrons of scholars and intellectuals, so sort of financing them, paying for their education, paying for them to produce works, leading to the significant advancement of fields such as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, so some advanced sciences, etc. For example, more mathematics and medicine, which we haven't seen as prevalent in many previous empires so far. The establishment of Al-Azhar University in Cairo contributed to the dissemination of knowledge, so one of the earliest examples of a university established during this caliphate. As for military campaigns, the Fatimids engaged in military campaigns to expand their territory, often clashing with neighboring powers such as the Byzantine Empire and various Sunni Muslim states, so conflicting with Muslim as well, or people who also follow Islam, but however they're from Sunni, for example, like the Abbasids, which they broke off from, claiming Shia descent. As for decline and fragmentation, perhaps beginning around 1074 CE, starting with internal strife. So the Fatimid dynasty began to decline due to internal strife, very common, almost necessary in the decline of all empires. In fact, off the top of my head, I don't think any had no internal conflicts or internal factors that led to their decline. Perhaps sometimes the external factors are largely the cause, but there's always some sort of internal factors. In this case, the internal factors are perhaps one of the predominant, or maybe the predominant, and including succession disputes and challenges from powerful viziers and military commanders. Perhaps it was in its DNA, as it had already split off from the Abbasid Caliphate itself. As for the Seljuk threat, so an external threat, the rise of the Seljuk Turks in the Eastern Islamic world further posed a significant threat to the Fatimid power. The Seljuks captured Jerusalem in 1071, weakening the Fatimid influence in the Levant, but however they held influence in Jerusalem for a time, which perhaps puts it in maybe the pantheon of great empires to rule over Jerusalem. From a conquest standpoint or from a military achievement standpoint, whether it's moral or not. And not claiming that any have a necessary right to it. Perhaps one does, though. As for Crusader incursions, so the First Crusade launched in 1095. So this is our first reference to the First Crusade. Further weakened the Fatimids, and as Crusader armies captured Jerusalem and established the Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1099 CE. So the First Crusade is the first reference, and this is in Fatimid territory, so it's very, very fascinating. As for fragmentation, however, by the mid-12th century, the Fatimid dynasty had fragmented due to internal conflicts and external pressures. This is common the theme. Local rulers and military commanders asserted their autonomy, leading to disintegration of centralized Fatimid dynasty. So lack of centralized authorities. As empires tend to rise, they seem to gain centralized authority, stronger centralized government, but as they decline, necessarily, it goes in the opposite direction. In this case, these viziers, for example, these regional lords, to use a similar term, started to fight for autonomy, and perhaps, as I said, it was maybe perhaps in its DNA having already broken off from the Abbasid Caliphate. As for the end of the Fatimid dynasty in 1171 CE, the Ayyubid conquest. In 1069 CE, the Ayyubid general Saladin, very famous leader of the Kingdom of Heaven, was a movie that really inspired me to get interested in history. Ridley Scott, very great scene at the very end. Saladin, the depth is probably eludes me because all he goes, Saladin says, they ask, what is Jerusalem worth to you? He says, nothing. And he walks away into the sunset and turns around and says, everything. So that scene always stuck with me, and it was Saladin does not have too many lines, but a lot of emphasis was put on it. So I've been trying to just to track the meaning from it, the dual meaning of the absolute worth, but the insignificance of Jerusalem, but also the aura of Saladin was really, I think, fabulously captured. But nonetheless, that is Saladin seized power in Egypt, effectively ending the Fatimid rule. Salah ad-Din officially abolished the Fatimid Caliphate in 1171 CE and established the Ayyubid Sultanate. So he was ultimately defeated by Salah ad-Din in Age of Empires, the original computer game I often like to play, Saladin. So a very nice full circle here and sort of nostalgic for me. So thus, the rise and fall of the Fatimid dynasty represent a significant chapter in the history of the Islamic world, characterized by periods of prosperity, intellectual advancement, and political turmoil. Just to highlight a specific leader at the zenith of the Fatimid Caliphate, that would be Al-Mu'iz Lidin Allah. So one of the most important rulers of the Fatimid Caliphate was Al-Mu'iz Lidin Allah, who reigned from 953 to 975 CE, which is seen as the zenith of the Fatimid Caliphate. For some background information about him, his full name would be Abu Tamim Ma'ad Al-Mu'iz Lidin Allah. I have friends named Mu'iz. I wonder if there's any connection between Mu'iz. I could not find any direct connection from limited research I was able to do, but if someone would be able to tell me, that'd be fascinating to know. And it means glorified of the religion of God. And it's from 26th of September, who lived from 26th of September 932 to 16th of December 975. I think that maybe makes him a Virgo, if anyone believes in those things. And he was the fourth Fatimid Caliph. Caliphs are the monarchs or the hereditary leaders of the Fatimid Caliphate. And from the 14th is Ma'ili Imam, so the leader of that, or religious leader, reigning from 953 to 975 CE, so quite a significant reign too, 22 years. It was during his caliphate that the center of power of the Fatimid dynasty was moved from Ifriqiya, which is in modern-day Tunisia, where the caliphate started, to Egypt, and established Cairo as its new capital, which has so much deep history Cairo, maybe as a part of Egypt, as a broader history, is a theme we've covered significantly in this series. The Fatimids founded the city of Cairo as well during his reign, or Al-Qaira. Al-Qaira would be the pronunciation, or meaning the victorious. So that's what Cairo means, Al-Qaira, victorious, and founded by, or established as the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate by Al-Mu'iz. It was during his caliphate that the center of the power moved there in 969 CE. So, as for his early life and rise to power, pardon me, Al-Mu'iz Lidin Allah was born in 932 CE as Abu Tamim Ma'ad Al-Mu'iz Lidin Allah in the city of Raqqada, located in present-day Tunisia. He was the son of the Fatimid Caliph al-Qaim bi-Amr Allah, so coming from the royal lineage. So some of our great leaders have had more or less privileged upbringings. I would say Al-Muiz might have been on the more privileged relative to the other people within his empire in terms of vying for the throne. He received an excellent education, as the most superior education one could likely get from the caliphate, which included instruction in various fields such as theology, of course, religion, Islam, Shia Islam, philosophy, and statecraft. From a young age, he displayed remarkable intelligence and leadership qualities, preparing him for his future role as the ruler of the Fatimid Caliphate. So he was expected to rule, so he acquired or was expected to gain an education requisite. As for his ascension to the throne upon the death of his father, Caliph al-Qaim bi-Amr Allah, so that's somewhat of a unique feature, but probably the most common, but some leadership transitions happen before the death of the incumbent. Sometimes it's a leadership transfer, which is generally smoother. A death is a little more of a surprise and a sudden switch. In 946 CE, and Al-Muiz's elder brother Al-Mansur at first succeeded him as the Fatimid Caliphate. However, Al-Mansur's reign was short-lived, and he died in 953 CE. And Al-Muiz, then known as Ma'ad, succeeded his brother as the fifth Fatimid Caliph at age 21. So now we see conflicting information. We see on one side he's either considered the fourth or the fifth. So dispute of sources here, but nonetheless, he's either the fourth or the fifth. And my apologies that there's a discrepancy in these two sources, and I cannot weigh which is more correct. But nonetheless, it was likely that certain his father was a caliph, and perhaps likely that he had an older brother who reigned for a time before him. And allegedly, he came to power at the age of 21, according to the second source. So as for achievements and contributions, Al-Muiz Ladin Allah's reign was marked by significant achievements and contributions in various aspects of governance, culture, and military affairs. Some of his most notable accomplishments include the expansion of the empire, and for example, under his leadership, the Fatimid Caliphate expanded its territorial holdings, particularly in North Africa, Egypt, for example, and the Levant. So territorial expansion is one of the main ways of qualifying a powerful leader or a powerful ruler of an empire. Furthermore, he initiated military campaigns to conquer key cities and regions, further consolidating the Fatimid power. As for his foundation of Cairo, meaning the victorious, Al-Muiz was renowned for the establishment of the city of Cairo as the new capital of the Fatimid Caliphate in 969 CE. Cairo is now the capital of Egypt, so perhaps its influence and its decision to make Cairo the capital of its empire might have been influential in Cairo being the capital of Egypt today. Perhaps it was another empire, or perhaps the Fatimid Caliphate was necessary. Maybe if the Fatimid Caliphate had not done this, maybe Cairo would not be the capital of Egypt today. A hypothetical, but maybe. The founding of Cairo marked a pivotal point further for the Fatimid history, in that transforming it into a bustling center of trade, culture, and learning, too, so consolidating. Setting a capital, just the process of setting a capital leads to some sort of centralization or centralizing dynamic. As for his promotion of learning and culture, Al-Muiz was a patron of scholars, poets, and intellectuals, fostering an environment of learning and cultural exchange within his empire. He founded institutions of higher education, such as the famous Al-Azhar University, one of the earliest universities. We do have the earlier Greek examples on a smaller scale, and this is one of the earliest, perhaps, Islamic universities, formally, or to this degree as well, which remains as one of the earliest universities and furthermore lasting to this day, and it's still lasting to this day. Far older than, for example, Oxford or Cambridge in the United Kingdom, that's for certain. As for architectural projects, Al-Muiz has commissioned numerous architectural projects in Cairo, including mosques, palaces, and public buildings, so also architecture, making them sort of maybe one of the epitomes of art, according to Ayn Rand in The Fountainhead. The protagonist he's sort of mastered every basic from the plumbing, from the ply wall, etc., all the way to the point that he can be creative and that he can be an architect. So that's sort of one philosophy, which I kind of think has some truth, but nonetheless, it's not our non-sedentary peoples did not engage in architecture. So this is something that's perhaps at least somewhat unique to the Fatimid Caliphate, and it was something that was particularly unique to this ruler Al-Muiz. These structures showcased the distinctive Fatimid architectural style, characterized by intricate geometric designs and ornate decorations. Furthermore, he's also recognized for his religious tolerance. Despite being the leader of the Shia Ismaili dynasty, Al-Muiz adopted a policy of religious tolerance, allowing freedom of worship for Muslims and non-Muslims alike within his realm. So that's quite unique for a distinctly empire founded on a distinct religious sect. This policy contributed to the cultural diversity and stability of the Fatimid Caliphate, and likely to an amalgamation of different types of learning in different cultures. As for his later years and legacy, Al-Muiz Lidin Allah ruled 22 years until his death in 975 CE. His reign is remembered as a period of prosperity, cultural flourishing, and political stability within the Fatimid Caliphate. Al-Muiz's legacy continues to endure through his contributions to architecture, education, and religious tolerance. His founding of Cairo and patronage of learning left an indelible mark on the history of the Islamic world, solidifying his reputation as one of the most important rulers of the Fatimid Caliphate. So that is Al-Muiz Lidin Allah. We'll now move to the content of the slide. So the title, we have Al-Muiz Lidin Allah and the Fatimid Caliphate. The further titles is the Caliphate extant from the 10th to 12th centuries CE under the rule of the Fatimids and Ismaili Shia, and it was also an Ismaili Shia dynasty. The ancestry is traced to Islamic prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima and her husband Ali, the first Shia Imam. So that's Shia religion, but also descendancy from Prophet Muhammad. But not necessarily throughout its whole history being sticking to it too strongly. For example, Al-Muiz Lidin Allah practiced some sort of religious tolerance. So, significant leader, we have Al-Muiz Lidin Allah. The empire was the Fatimid Caliphate. The period was from 909 to 1171 CE, which is considered part of the early Middle Ages. The modern locations include Tunisia, that's where the empire began when it broke off from achieved independence from the Abbasid Caliphate, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, which later became its capital, particularly Cairo as its capital city, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. Million square kilometers, 4.10, which is quite large. It's about four times our average. I actually calculated the average of the entire list of empires we will be covering, and the average is 1.17. So not quite 4 times, but over 3 times as large. So quite important. But some, for example, the Abbasid Caliphate, which it broke off of, was up at 11.1, I believe, million square kilometers. So less than half the size of the Abbasid or Umayyad Caliphate, which were its predecessors. In terms of million square kilometers, that's 1.58 million square miles, pardon me. That percent of the world is 3.04%. That's excluding Antarctica, a very large area of land, and it's also important to note that it was a contested area of land. For example, they broke off of an existing empire, and they had to fight other existing empires to claim these territories. Egypt, for example, had been inhabited by empires such as the first Egyptian kingdom, which we have covered. The capital was first Raqqada from 909 to 921 CE, Mahdia from 921 to 948, Al-Mansuriya from 948 to 973, and Cairo from 973 to 1171 CE. The government was a hereditary caliphate. The common languages were Arabic, Berber languages, and Coptic. The religion was Ismaili Shia Islam, which was the state religion, but under certain leaders, such as Al-Muiz Lidin Allah, did allegedly exert some degree of religious tolerance. Population was several millions, which would be much less considering the geographical extent today, but they did not have the same, supposedly have the same technologies that we have today to support a larger population. But maybe it was larger, but several millions, likely less than less than maybe 20, but maybe it was larger. This is the sources that I was able to acquire. Is for images on the top left, we have the gold dinar of Al-Muiz, which was minted in Cairo in 973 CE. So I could not find an image of Al-Muiz, but this sort of brings everything together. So it's a coin minted by Al-Muiz, our leader, and minted in Cairo, which is the capital created by him in 973 CE. To the right of that, we have the Al-Azhar Mosque in, that's the one in the bottom bottom left, the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, built by the Fatimids between 970 and 972 CE, so showing some of that architecture. In the top left, we have the Bab al-Fatu, one of the gates of Cairo, dating from the Badr al-Jamali's reconstruction of the city walls in 1987. I think it shows, say, the architectural capacities, but also the importance of military might and defenses. For example, they were eventually defeated by Saladin later, who was certainly in Kingdom of Heaven, for example. We saw those big walls, etc. For those who have seen the movies, it's very important. So although they had the arts and learning and perhaps even religious tolerance, they did need to fight often and in significant ways. Below that, we have the Fatimid Caliphate al-Mahdi Billah receiving an envoy from Simeon I of Bulgaria. We have covered the First Bulgarian Empire in the Madrid Skilitzes in the 12th century. So showing their art, sort of how they dress, and sort of some of their regal processes, according to the artist. And we can also see the Arabic script above it. To the right of that, we have the Al-Hakim, and the bottom right, we have the Al-Hakim Mosque in Cairo, commissioned by Al-Aziz in 990 CE and completed by Al-Hakim in 1013, showing, I think it's indicative of a long-term outlook to be started by one and continued and finished by another. It was later renovated in the 1980s by Dawoodi Bohra. And above that, we have an architectural fragment from the bathhouse in Al-Futsat in the 11th century CE, which shows perhaps how they might have dressed, but also showing some of their artistic abilities. To the right of that, we have some additional information. So the overthrow of the Aghlabids was in 909 CE, the Fatimid conquest of Egypt and the foundation of Cairo was in 969 CE, and the abolition by Saladin was on the 17th of September 1171 CE. The currency was the dinar, as we have on the top left, and the dirham. It was preceded by the Abbasid Caliphate, which we have covered, the Anghlid Emirate, the Ikshadid, the Wilaya, and the Emirate of Tehert. And it was succeeded by the Ayyubid Sultanate, Saladin, the Crusader States, the Emirate of Sicily, the Zirid Empire, the Hammadid, the Emirate Seljuk, the Seljuk Empire, or the Hammadid Emirate and the Seljuk Empire, the Sulyahids, and the Sharifate of Mecca. A very important one as well. And as we have a map here, so quite detailed map here. So starting off here in the circa 960, the green and brownish or yellowish color showing where they started in Tunisia. Then they expanded by 1100 or to 1000 CE to include this red and purple. So this green, red, and purple, but they seem to have lost this brown territory. But then in 1050 they have only the purple, this red, and then they get the yellow back, losing the green. And then by 1100 CE they're centered around here with the purple, and having Jerusalem here was the conquest and the Crusades. So very fascinating history and movement, because there's more so less linked, I would say, to a specific place, or even but more to a religion, which allowed it to be flexible in its geographical location, I hypothesize. So that is Al-Muiz Ladin Allah of the Fatimid Caliphate, and we'll cover the leader a bit more, and perhaps the empire effectually in the comparison, after covering the Song Dynasty. So the Song Dynasty spanned from 906 D0 to 1279 CE, and it was a pivotal era in Chinese history, marked by significant advancements in various fields, including governance, economy, culture, and technology. The history of the Song dynasty should also be noted. This is not to be confused with the Liu Song of dynasty of the northern and southern dynasties period, which we indirectly have covered. So the Liu Song dynasty is different from this Song dynasty, which is more significant. The history of the Song dynasty can be divided into two main periods: the Northern Song dynasty period, which was from 960 to 1127 CE, and the Southern dynasty period from 1127 to 1279 CE. I thought it would make more sense to combine them into one episode so they can be seen in comparison, but also there's a lot of continuity between the two, each characterized by distinct, however, political, social, and military development. So they each have a distinct history, but we will cover them both here. So for some background information, so the Song dynasty was an imperial dynasty of China that ruled from 960 to 1279 CE over the two periods. The dynasty was founded by Emperor Taizu, that's Taizu, of Song, whom we will cover in a specific biography, who usurped the throne of the later Zhou dynasty and went on to conquer the rest of the 10 kingdoms, ending the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. So there was this 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, but this Song dynasty reigned supreme, first by usurping another throne. First, Emperor Taizu usurped another throne, and then he conquered all other 10 kingdoms, ending the 5 and 10 kingdoms. So very significant achievement. The Song often came into conflict, however, with the contemporaneous Liao and the Western Xia and the Qin dynasties in northern China. So there were other threats, as we shall see on the map, but nonetheless they were the most powerful in the region for their time. After retreating to southern China following the attacks of the Qin dynasty, that's spelled Jin, the Song were eventually conquered by Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, so Mongolian dynasty. The Great Walls of China, which I recently learned could extend half the equator, I believe, maybe even more, half the entire equator, because it's all like stacked up and mixed up. That's a huge, significant achievement, that length, but it was because of the barbarians, as they call them, such as these Mongol, and hence the Mongol Yuan dynasty ultimately defeated, for example, the Song dynasty, so maybe rightfully so building those walls. So starting with the rise of the Song dynasty, starting from 960 CE. So the founding of the dynasty. So the Song dynasty was founded by Zhao Quangyin, also known as Emperor Taizu, who we'll have a specific biography of, who emerged as victorious in the struggle for power following the collapse of the preceding Tang dynasty, which we have covered in a previous episode. In 960 CE, he established the Northern Song dynasty with its capital in Kaifeng. So ultimately, with the collapse of the Tang dynasty, he established his own. As for political reforms, Emperor Taizu implemented a series of political reforms aimed at consolidating central authority, strengthening bureaucratic governance, and promoting meritocracy within the civil service. So, common theme even amongst the earliest Chinese dynasties was centralized authority, strong bureaucratic government, and meritocracy commonly throughout the leadership as well. So not a lot of, to some extent, some hereditary power, etc., but a lot of, for the working bureaucracy, a lot of meritocracy within the civil service, particularly, which is particularly large throughout the dynasties so far, and true for the Song dynasty and through the endeavors of Emperor Taizu. This period saw the rise of the civil service examination system, which selected officials based on their knowledge of Confucian classics rather than aristocratic birth. So perhaps even outdoing the previous dynasties by implementing an examination system. Modern day China still has examination systems, so early implemented by the Song dynasty, and definitely leading to eradicating aristocracy, but also creating a more cutthroat, potentially, environment. As for economic prosperity, the Song dynasty experienced significant economic growth fueled by innovations such as paper money. That's a huge, significant achievement that happened during this dynasty. Even, for example, the Fatimid Caliphate, which we are also covering in this episode, was still using coin money at this time. So this paper money was an innovation of this Song dynasty. Paper was also an innovation of ancient China. Furthermore, they also had the widespread use of printing at this time, and advancements in agriculture and irrigation techniques cannot over exaggerate the importance of widespread printing and sharing knowledge, but also sharing laws, etc., strengthening the bureaucracy and centralized government. And advancements in agriculture and irrigation techniques allowed for significant growth in population. So previous, even in this region, empires, their dynasties in China were much smaller populations. For the first time, we're starting to see very large populations in this region, and even generally for an empire. Furthermore, trade flourished along the Grand Canal, connecting the northern and southern China, and as well maritime routes in the South China Sea. So also using these established irrigation techniques and developing their own that had slowly sort of built up throughout Chinese history. For example, in the earliest history, they used to get floods. The first empires got rid of the floods, then they got irrigation. Things sort of get better and better, and each succeeding dynasty sort of benefits from its preceding dynasties, it seems. And here, they're even more so benefiting from the trade opportunities between the north and south. As for cultural flourishing, the northern...
Okay, I found this on the web for Ed Sheeran.
Sorry, my Siri went off. As for cultural flourishing, the Northern Song dynasty was a golden age in Chinese culture, marked by remarkable achievements in poetry, literature, painting, calligraphy, and ceramics. So, a lot of arts too, as we shall see. Artists and scholars such as Su Dongpo and Fan Quan made significant contributions to the cultural landscape of the era. As for the fall of the Northern Song dynasty, as for the Jurchen invasion, so the Northern Song dynasty faced external threats from nomadic tribes in the north, long been a fear, and rightfully so, of the Chinese, particularly the Jurchen people of the Qin dynasty, who were perhaps even Chinese themselves, and not formally barbarians, however, but just the common theme of threats from the north. In 1127 CE, the Jurchens captured Kaifeng, forcing the Song court to flee southward and leading to the collapse of the Northern Song dynasty. So they had their capital captured, but they still remained vigor and endeavored to continue their dynasty. So they proceeded to establishment of the Southern Song dynasty, which reigned from 1127 to 1279 CE. So it's the southern capital. Following the fall of Kaifeng, so the court fled to the Song established its new court in Hangzhou. That's Hangzhou, and marking the beginning of the Southern Song dynasty. Despite losing control over northern territories, the Southern Song dynasty continued to govern southern China, including the prosperous Yangtze River Delta region, so still holding some huge economic assets particularly. As for their military campaigns, so they still kept a fight in them, as it seems. The Southern Song dynasty faced ongoing military conflicts with the Qin dynasty, that's Jin, in the north, and the emerging Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan, an empire we shall see soon, very famous leader. Despite the efforts to retake the northern territories, the Song military was unable to mount a successful campaign against their adversaries. So sort of on the defensive, had to flee to the south, and things just kept sort of downward. So the Southern dynasty was maybe common trending towards its decline. Thus, for the fall of the Southern Song dynasty in 1279 CE, starting with the Mongol conquests. So the Mongol Yuan dynasty, under the leadership of Kublai Khan, launched a final assault of the Southern Song dynasty. Despite fierce resistance, the Song forces were defeated, and Hangzhou, their capital, their second capital, fell to the Mongols in 1279 CE, marking the end of the dynasty. So those Mongols, those barbarians that were long feared by the Chinese dynasties, ultimately were the ones that defeated the Southern Song dynasty. As for the legacy, despite its eventual defeat, the Song dynasty left a lasting legacy of innovation, cultural vibrancy, and administrative efficiency that influenced future dynasties in modern China even, perhaps. Its achievements in governance, technology, and culture laid the foundation for subsequent dynasties in Chinese history. Thus, the rise and fall of the Song dynasty represent a dynamic period of Chinese history characterized by political consolidation, economic prosperity, cultural flourishing, and military challenges and achievements, but predominantly in the latter periods, military challenges, but sort of strong resistance and resilience. So to highlight a specific leader, Emperor Taizu, who got it all started, and maybe almost a very heroic figure, and the founder of the Song dynasty. So for some background information, Emperor Taizu of Song, born 21st of March, I believe that makes him an Aries or maybe a Taurus, like my father. Often allegedly hardworking, if one believes in those things. But this is back in 927 CE, so maybe they had no application back then. Or maybe they have no application now, just throwing that out there. And dying on the 14th of November, 976 CE. His personal name was Zhao Kuang-yin, that's Zhaoquangyin, and his courtesy name, Yuan Lang, was interesting. Just a short parallel. Yuan Lang was his courtesy name, but the Yuan dynasty would ultimately conquer the Song dynasty, which is the Mongol Empire. No real connection here, but Yuan, if put in pinyin characters or put in Latin characters, is the same root, but I don't think there's much there. But nonetheless, Emperor Taizu is the main name we will refer to, was the founding emperor of the Song dynasty of China. He reigned from 960 until his death in 976 CE. Formerly a distinguished military general in the later Zhou dynasty, so coming from a general, not necessarily coming from an emperor, not the son of an emperor. Emperor Taizu came to power after staging a coup d'etat, essentially military takes over the government, a coup d'etat, hit the state, maybe it's French, or hit of the state, and forcing Emperor Gong of the later Zhou dynasty, the later Zhou ruler, to abdicate the throne in his favor. So a military general who took the throne, almost like a Julius Caesar type figure. So as for his early life, so Emperor Taizu, born Zhao Kuang-yin, entered the world in 927 CE in the midst of the later Zhou dynasty's rule. His birthplace was in Jianyang in present-day Henan province, China. And he raised in a family of military background, so he did have some benefit through his background, which is that his family was involved in some military background, which would help him if he wanted to have a coup later in life, but he obviously did not have royal blood. And Taizu's father, Zhao Hongyin, was a renowned general serving the later Zhou army, so perhaps popular, maybe a bit of nepotism going for him as well. To what extent is debatable, but he did not. He did have quite a bit of clout growing up, perhaps. From his youth, Taizu exhibited exceptional intelligence and martial prowess, military prowess. He received, or abilities, or military strategy. He received a comprehensive education encompassing Confucian classics, Confuji, a great leader of thought we've covered in our History of Leaders of Thought series, studying also military strategy and statecraft, nurturing the skills that would later define his leadership. As for his military career and rise to power, Emperor Taizu commenced his military career with the later Zhou army, rapidly ascending through the ranks, perhaps through the spirit of his father or through the influence of his father, due to his valor and strategic brilliance, or entirely on his own accord, perhaps. He earned accolades for his leadership in numerous campaigns, becoming a respected figure among soldiers and generals alike, so quite a popular figure amongst both authority and amongst his peers, and even later his subordinates. In 960 CE, seizing the opportunity amid political instability and the waning power of the later Zhou dynasty, Emperor Taizu orchestrated a decisive military coup, or coup d'etat, overthrowing the weakening ruling regime, and he proclaimed himself Emperor Taizu and inaugurated the Song dynasty. This bold move marked the dawn of the new era of Chinese history. As for his reforms and governance, Emperor Taizu's reign was characterized by sweeping reforms aimed at consolidating central authority and fostering stability and prosperity, a common theme particularly amongst our previous Chinese dynasties, perhaps, but even more so, greater extent under Emperor Taizu than previously seen. One of his most significant reforms was the establishment of a civil service examination system, a very centralized but meritocratic system, anti-aristocratic, which emphasized meritocracy over hereditary privilege in the selection of government officials. This reform facilitated the recruitment of talented individuals into his bureaucracy, enhancing administrative efficiency and integrity. Furthermore, Emperor Taizu implemented economic policies to stimulate growth and development, including tax reforms and initiatives to promote agriculture, trade, and industry. His governance laid the groundwork for economic prosperity that would define the Song dynasty. As for his military triumphs, the word triumph comes from our Roman Empire. A triumph would be a big parade whenever a great Roman leader, general, would have a military achievement. They would have a big parade. That's where the word triumph comes from. So as for Emperor Taizu's military triumphs, not that version of the word, however, Emperor Taizu's military campaigns were instrumental in reunifying China, which had been fragmented in the aftermath of the Tang dynasty's collapse, a fascinating empire we previously covered. And I'm grateful if you endeavor to watch it or listen to it. He led to successful campaigns against rival warlords and rebel factions, securing control over vast territories, so claimed all this northern territory. Among his notable achievements was the defeat of Liu Chongwang, a formidable warlord in 960 CE. This victory solidified Emperor Taizu's authority over northern China, consolidating his rule and laying the foundation for the empire's stability. So, not just effective in his coup d'etat, he was successful in subsequent military achievements, claiming ultimately the whole of the northern Song dynasty, or most of it at least, and that was later even taken too. So perhaps if he were to somehow rule subsequently throughout the whole history of the Song dynasty, maybe it never would have disappeared. A hypothesis, probably unlikely true, because there are other factors as well. And maybe if he, maybe in another position or another time, he would not have fared as well. So as for the content of the slide, the title we have Emperor Taizu and the Song Dynasty. It was an imperial dynasty of China founded by Emperor Taizu, who usurped the throne from the later Chu dynasty and conquered the rest of the Tang kingdoms and ended the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period. A very significant empire. The significant leader was Emperor Taizu. The empire was the Song dynasty. The period was 960 to 1279 CE, considered part of the post-classical era. Pardon me. The modern location would be China. Million square kilometers is 3.1 or 2.3 for the southern. Million square kilometers equivalent is 1.2 for the northern, or 0.89 for the southern. So still quite large for both periods. Our average for across all but these are all of approximately 90 or so empires that we will be covering. Maybe more, maybe less. I didn't know if I was going to reveal that, but nonetheless, the average is 1.17 or maybe 1.14, but nonetheless, this is significantly larger than the average size of our empires, but empires do tend to get larger over time as well. Furthermore, it must be noted that, however, this is the equivalent of 2.30 for the northern, or 1.56% for the southern of the world, excluding Antarctica. But it must be noted that these are contested areas of land. It's not there have been warring states here for centuries, or hundreds of centuries, so, centuries, not hundreds of centuries, tens of centuries perhaps. But nonetheless, it was a very populated region too, so quite large, but still smaller than those such as the Abbasid and the Umayyad Caliphates, which are the largest we've covered so far, tied for 7th place at 11 million square kilometers, so it's quite a bit smaller, less than a third of the size. So the capital cities started with Bianqing, or Bianqing was the capital from 960 to 1127. Yangtian was the capital from 1127 to 1128. Yangzhou was the capital from 1128 to 1129. Yangning was the capital from 1129 to 1138. And Lin'an was the capital from 1029 and 1138 to 1276 CE. The government was a monarchy, hereditary monarchy. Government common languages was Middle Chinese. Religion was Chinese Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Chinese folk religion, Islam, Chinese, and Nestorian Christianity. If you have watched my History of Leaders of Thought series, we cover a lot of ancient Taoism, Confucianism. I'd be very grateful if you check out that series as well. And if you already have, I'm very grateful. And I hope you continue to do so. Maybe return. Population was likely between 50 to 100 million for the northern and 100 to 120 million to the southern. So this is a much larger population. I have seen also sources that put the northern as larger than the southern, so that's why there's this range. It is possible, for example, that the northern was larger. Maybe it was like 80 million for the northern and 60 million for the southern. Maybe the southern is overstated here, or according to that source. But nonetheless, this perhaps at one point the Song dynasty got over 100 million, which is one of the largest in terms of population we've covered so far. So very, very large. Perhaps similar in population to the Abbasid or the Umayyad Caliphate, despite being smaller geographically. And that's perhaps through all the irrigation techniques that we've established through both during this dynasty, but particularly throughout the history of ancient China. So as for images, in the top left, we have an image of Emperor Taizu himself sitting, as we can see, a larger individual, and quite he seems quite regal and quite thoughtful and wise, I find. To the right of that, we have a palace portrait. To the right of that, we have the image, a portrait on a hanging scroll kept in the Nalish Palace Museum in Taipei, the Republic of China. So pardon me, that is his palace portrait, but it's kept in the National Palace Museum in Taipei. So that's where one can find that image of Emperor Taizu in Taipei. To the right of that, we have the Song dynasty at pardon me, on the we'll get to that map later. Sorry, I'm jumping around. So pardon me, to the right of that, a city, a gate in Shaoqing in the Zhejiang province, built in 1223 during the Song dynasty. An incredible piece of architecture to get down into this, and the irrigation we can see here with the water too. It's amazing architecture that even today would be incredible to observe. Imagine if they were building something like that outside in the street. I could not even imagine. So beautiful, and it stands the test of time. People would not even consider taking that down now. So that, I think, is an epitome of great architecture. To the right of that, we have anonymous painting of Can Wenqi and her Xiongnu husband. So Xiongnu were barbarian peoples dating from the Emperor Song, so sort of showing that they some at least had some belief in romance, and perhaps the idea of falling in love with the barbarian, a noble Song woman falling in love with the barbarian would be somewhat acceptable, is something to think is somewhat poetic, despite that they get defeated by ultimate barbarians at the end, and they were fighting with them many times, and even fighting with other Chinese dynasties. They still had a belief in sort of love, circumventing boundaries. Below that, we have Emperor Taizu of Song, Emperor Taizong of Song, his son, and Prime Minister Chao Pu and other ministers playing kuju, which was an early form of football by Qian Chuan, so showing that they also had time for play, despite him being such a great military conqueror and even playing with his son. And pardon me for that. And below that, we have a 12th century painting of Su by Su Han Chen, showing a girl who waves at a peacock feather banner, like the one used in the dramatic theater to signal an acting leader of troops. So showing sort of a young girl, but perhaps she's signaling troops, so perhaps it's got a military connotation as well, but also kind of playful as well. I think it's a really beautiful piece of art, showing the innocence of this young girl with a feather, for example, but it's alluding to the coming of an army. I think it's sort of beautiful concept, but not necessarily a beautiful idea. Maybe it would be better if it was vice versa, an army signaling a young girl to come. As for the information, we have the currency was the Jiao Qi, the Guan Qi, the Hui Qi, the Chinese cash, Chinese coin, and the copper coins, etc. So they established paper money, a hugely significant achievement that greatly must have facilitated its economy and perhaps that's why its population was able to get so large into some degree. It was preceded by the later Chu dynasty, the Qing Nan, the later Shu, the southern Han, the southern Tang, the Wu Yue, and the northern Han, and it was succeeded by the Qin dynasty and the Yuan dynasty, which we all covered. And we've covered the Qin dynasty over long periods of time as well. So for some significant emperors, the first emperor, Emperor Taizu, the founder of the Northern Song, in 900, reigned from 960 to 976. Emperor Gaozhong, the founder of the Southern Song, who reigned from 1127 to 1162 CE, and Qiao Bing, who is the last to reign from 1278 to 1279 CE. So the empire was established on the 4th of February 960. The signing of the Shan-Yuan Treaty with Liao was signed in 1005. The alliance with Qin was created in 1115 to 1125 CE. The Jing-Kang incident was in 1127 CE. The beginning of the Mongol invasion was in 1235 CE. The fall of Linan was in 1276. The Battle of Yamen was on the 19th of March 1279, which ended the dynasty. And lastly, in the map, we have shown the Song dynasty at its greatest territorial extent in 1111, I believe. And it's also showing the culmination of the northern and the southern periods too. We can see the western Xia, we can see the Liao. Qin would be somewhere around here because they would ultimately take the northern portions, and up here would be where their nomadics and our Mongols, many of the empires we covered. We've also covered the Tibetan Empire. I didn't see any interactions between the Song dynasty and the Tibetans, and Goryeo, which was a Korean empire as well. A little bit smaller, however. So that is Emperor Taizu and the Song dynasty. As for a comparison between these two great leaders, Al-Muiz Ladin Allah and Emperor Taizu. So, comparison and contrast between Al-Muiz Ladin Allah of the Fatimid Caliphate and Emperor Taizu of the Song dynasty. So, starting with their differences and similarities in their background and rise to power. So, Al-Muiz Ladin Allah was born into the Fatimid ruling family, so the sort of the highest lineage one could get, and ascended to the caliphate in 953 CE after the death of his father. His ascension followed a period of internal strife within the Fatimid dynasty. So sort of maybe the most natural or the most simple way to become leader of a caliphate is if your father was the leader of the caliphate. Whereas Emperor Taizu was born Zhao Quanyin, rose to power through a military coup against the later Chu dynasty in 960 CE. His father was a powerful military general, quite famous, but he did not have that noble or royal lineage. And he proclaimed himself emperor and founded the Song dynasty, marking the beginning of a new era of Chinese history. So, Emperor Taizu necessarily founded an empire, but Al-Muiz Ladin Allah sort of perfected an empire or got it to its greatest state. As for governance and reforms, Al-Muiz Ladin Allah implemented administrative reforms and promoted religious tolerance within the Fatimid Caliphate, perhaps quite different from his successors and successor caliphates as well. He established institutions of learning and culture, fostering a vibrant intellectual environment in its new capital, which he established. And he established a capital, Cairo. As for Emperor Taizu, he implemented administrative reforms aimed at consolidating central authority and promoting meritocracy within the government. So, centralization as well. He established civil service examinations to select officials based on their knowledge of Confucian classics, enhancing administrative efficiency. So this is kind of nuanced because in some way Al-Muiz Ladin Allah was not centralizing by being religiously tolerant, by moving the capital, but by creating a capital, it was in some ways was also centralizing. Emperor Taizu was in many ways centralizing, but also by having a meritocracy. It's sort of centralizing, but centralizing away from the aristocracy. So that's why it's not so simply left and right wing. There's centralization and decentralization on different metrics. So there's not necessarily left and right wing on different metrics. As for their military campaigns, Al-Muiz Ladin Allah led military campaigns to expand the territorial holdings of the Fatimid Caliphate, capturing Egypt in 969 CE and establishing Cairo as its capital. He faced opposition from the rival Sunni Muslim states and engaged in conflicts to secure the Fatimid dominance in North Africa and the Levant. As for Emperor Taizu, he conducted military campaigns to reunify China following the fragmentation of preceding dynasties. He defeated rival warlords and rebel factions, consolidating control over northern China and laying the groundwork for the stability of the Song dynasty. So they both expanded, but perhaps Emperor Taiju's was sort of a quicker rate, whereas Al-Muiz was sort of expanding an already great empire. As for their cultural, but that does not necessarily mean his battles were in any way harder or easier. As for cultural and intellectual patronage, Al-Muiz al-Din Allah was a patron of scholars, poets, and intellectuals, fostering an environment of learning and cultural exchange within the Fatimid Caliphate. He established institutions such as Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which became one of the centers of Islamic scholarship and one of the oldest universities that still exists today. As for Emperor Taizu, he promoted cultural flourishing within the Song dynasty, supporting literature, poetry, calligraphy, and painting. His court was adorned with talented scholars and artists that contributed to a vibrant cultural environment. Some of that beautiful art we saw in the previous slide. They're also both similar in that they both were, at least, or their empires were both had focused on architecture, which is not necessarily true for many of our nomadic empires, which is distinct, for example, particularly our Chinese empires contrasted our nomadic empires that were non-sedentary, so they were definitely focused on architecture, as was the Fatimid Caliphate, as we've seen through many of its beautiful works. As for their legacies, Al-Muiz al-Din Allah's reign is remembered for a period of prosperity, cultural advancement, and religious tolerance, perhaps the golden age or the peak within the Fatimid Caliphate. His contributions to governance, culture, and scholarship left a lasting impact on Islamic civilization. However, because he was at the peak, maybe his predecessors could have done a better job in maintaining it. Maybe that's his fault, or maybe not. Maybe if he were to stay as leader for the history, maybe the Fatimid Caliphate would still exist today. As for Emperor Taiju's reign laid the foundation for the prosperity and stability of the Song dynasty. His administrative reforms, military achievements, and cultural patronage established the groundwork for the golden age of the Song dynasty. So he established the groundwork for the golden age, but he laid the foundation. So different periods, could they both have done well in each other's positions is impossible to say, but they certainly both did well in their own position. So, thus, while Al-Muiz al-Din Allah and Emperor Taizu were both significant rulers in their respective empires, they operated in different cultural, geographic, and political contexts. While Al-Muiz's reign was marked by the promotion of Shia Ismaili Islam, however, with religious tolerance and cultural flourishing, and in the Fatimid Caliphate, Emperor Taiju's reign is focused on the reunifying of China and his coup d'etat, and the establishment of a new empire, implementing administrative reforms and fostering cultural and economic prosperity within the Song dynasty. So both very, very great leaders and very fascinating empires. I very much learned a lot about these two empires and two leaders, and I think about leadership and empires generally as well. So thank you very much for watching this episode on the Fatimid Empire and the Song dynasty. I'm very grateful for your support, and I'd be very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.